Ever wondered what happens here behind the scenes at Plainly Difficult? Well, you can find out on my Instagram, which is plainly.john, or my second YouTube channel, which is Made by John. Now, without further ado, let's get on to this week's video. It is just before lunch on Wednesday the 10th of October 2012, and a crane is lifting a concrete beam in a car park building site in Miami, Florida. Just as the beam reaches the 6th floor, the northeast portion of the garage suddenly collapses. The event became yet another chapter in building blunders involving concrete in the state. My name is John, and welcome to Plainly Difficult. And today, we're looking at the Miami-Dade car park collapse. Background. Well, in case you're thinking this is a re-upload, it's not. There are far too many for comfort building collapses in the state of Florida. Concrete and Florida seem to go together like radioisotopes and scrap merchants. We are back once again to the sunny state of Florida and what feels like Groundhog Day, a concrete building collapse. But not only just a collapse, it is a collapse to do with a college, which rings deja vu for the Florida International University incident. And not only that, but this event is not the only concrete structure collapse at this college in particular. Our story starts just over a year before the collapse in July 2011. With the signing of a contract for a new multi-storey car park at Miami-Dade College. The Board of Trustees had awarded a guaranteed maximum price design build contract to Ajax Building Corporation. The project had a price of $25 million. It was planned to be a 6-storey precast concrete structure with precast columns, beams, double T's and wall panels. The contract with Ajax Building Corporation would have 2 parts, the first being the design and architectural services, in which the company would undertake all the relevant building and site surveys. The second part would be the demolition of an already standing warehouse and the actual construction of the new multi-storey parking garage. For the second part of the project, Ajax contracted MAR Contracting Incorporated of Miami, Florida to design, fabricate and install all the concrete sections. Nothing unusual, but MAR then went on to contract out the work to a couple of other companies. Coreslab Structures Miami Incorporated for the design and fabrication of the concrete, but they too also subcontracted some of the work, in this case for design, to the consulting engineering group. Coreslab would still do the fabrication, however. For installation, MAR subbed out the work for erection to Solo Erectors, and for the final grout and wash, Florida Lemark Corporation of Doral would be used. I'm not going to lie, this is a little bit confusing to say the least. Well, regardless of the rather complex contracting arrangements, let's look at the design of this shiny new car park. Okay, well, I know multi-storey parking lots are hardly the most exciting of buildings, but they are very important nonetheless. The garage was to make use of precast beams footed on on-site cast bases with integral corbels for supporting the floors. The footings would be 5 foot deep and attached to the columns via bolts. The floors would consist of double T's running north-south, supported by either a single T or a spandrel precast member, running east to west. The inverted and double T's were welded together, along with the spandrel beams, and the inverted T's were then welded to the columns. These columns were in 2 sizes, 24 and 42 inches wide, the larger being in the middle of the building below the 2nd storey. The columns did have reinforcement, but only made of mild steel. Each level's column was cast as 2 separate pieces, which during construction would be bolted together. However, this left a 2-inch gap, which then had to be filled with a high strength grout. The lateral load resistance system employed at the car park was precast shear walls. Part of the load calculations involved predicted wind conditions for the area. But the construction, although not glamorous and on the face of it a simple project, I know it really wasn't, The car park construction was not without its, shall we say, incidents. On the 8th of October 2012, as one of the shear panels was being lifted by one of the on-site cranes, the boom arm struck the top of column B2. The Cores Lab engineer inspected the column from the ground and, not seeing any obvious damage, allowed construction to continue. Although no apparent damage to the column could be seen, the boom arm had a pretty substantial dent in it. Now, I know you can't really inspect it properly from the ground, but regardless, no X-ray of the column or even up-close viewing was undertaken. Well, it was to no one's surprise that when the next day, on the 9th of October, that this column was now 3/4 of an inch out of plumb. In layman's terms, it was now cockeyed. But what to do? Well, use a few shims and wedges to coax it back in line again. And this is what would happen on the morning of the 10th of October, when some double and inverted T's were installed. But again, this column was not properly inspected. By now though, disaster was just a few hours away. The disaster. It is the 10th of October 2012 and work is underway on the 6th level of the Miami-Dade car park. At roughly 11:25 in the morning, the on-site crane was preparing to lift a precast spandrel up to the 6th floor. It reached the top, but just before it could be lowered to its final resting place, at 11:30 am, the structure of the car park suddenly and dramatically collapsed. Columns from A2 to C5 had collapsed. All the double T's between the 6th floor and the 2nd floor pancaked on top of one another. An entire quarter of the total building had collapsed, weighing in at roughly 3,000 tonnes, and sadly anything or anyone inside was pulverised. 2 employees of Solar Erectors Incorporated, 1 employee of E&E Concrete Pumping Services Incorporated, and 1 employee of Stryker Electric Incorporated were inside. 1 would be rescued, only to succumb to their injuries in hospital a day later. After several days of combing the wreckage site, the focus shifted from rescue to recovery to eventually investigation. The investigation. Investigators would start dissecting the disaster site just 1 day after the collapse. These were 2 structural engineers from OSHA's Directorate of Construction. They would be looking at potential causes on the site for 2 weeks. In addition to this, another engineer attended to interview all the major stakeholders in the project. The investigation would delve into every aspect of the project, including construction documents, specifications, shop drawings and contractual papers, as well as photos and videos, all of which were taken at the incident site and at the storage yard where the fallen major structural members were stored for examination. When they started looking at the supporting columns, they found some worrying signs of poor workmanship. Several splices where the 2 precast sections of each column were connected together were lacking sufficient grout. Some of the columns even had no grout at their base. Most notable was column B3 and A3. Worryingly, this should have been picked up on the daily inspections. Even more worryingly, inspections of the higher sections of the structure were done from the ground, sometimes as far as 40 feet away, which clearly is not good enough. 18 columns were missing any kind of reported grout inspection, and when questioned, the main inspector was unaware of the need to check, which is rather concerning. So, it was quickly found out that the lack of grouting on the splices and the column bases was likely the cause of the collapse. OSHA found in their report that some sections were not supported on the day of the collapse, and when combined with the lack of grouted joints on at least 2 columns, this severely reduced the structure's reliability. They said in their report, as loads on the column gradually increased on the day of the collapse, the bearing of the column over the shim plates exceeded its capacity, resulting in failure. This triggered a cascade of collapse of columns, inverted T-beams and double Ts on all 5 floors, weighing approximately 3,300 tonnes over an area of approximately 16,000 square feet. OSHA fined 5 of the companies working on site $38,000 each for their incompetence, and a further $32,000 was charged to 4 of the companies. An undisclosed amount was paid as a settlement to the families of the 4 workers who became victims. But this wasn't the last disaster linked to this car park. On the 15th of April 2016, a beam fell off a construction crane, causing a concrete plate to come crashing down on the 3rd floor of the structure, injuring 3 workers. So it's now time for my rating. It's got to be negligent purely on the fact that the correct inspections were never undertaken. However, the car park project as a whole has to be considered a dumpster fire. And on my legacy scale, I'm going to give it a number 4. This is a Plain Difficult production. All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Difficult videos are produced by me, John, in a currently wet and windy corner of southern London, UK. I have Patreon and YouTube members, so thank you very much for your financial support, as well as the rest of you for tuning in every week. I've got Twitter and Instagram, and also a second channel, which is where you can listen to this outro song in full. And all that's left to say is thank you for watching, and Mr. Music Man, play us out please.